Russian President Vladimir Putin thought he would be able to dominate the Black Sea when he invaded Ukraine. He was wrong. Over the last 3 years, Ukraine has decimated about a third of Russia's once dreaded Black Sea fleet using missile and drone attacks. Now, it's come up with something even more terrifying for Russia to deal with. Ukraine's new carrier drones are about to wreak havoc in the Black Sea. And here's why those carrier drones mean the end for Putin's Black Sea fleet. On May 29, the Daily Mail published a video on its YouTube channel where it examined the new unmanned surface vehicles, or USVs, Ukraine has started to deploy in the Black Sea. These USVs are unlike anything Ukraine has used before. In the past, any attacking USV Ukraine sent into the Black Sea was going on a one-way trip. The drone would be packed with explosives and sent onto a collision course with a Russian ship. It was using this method that Ukraine managed to take out so many of the Black Sea fleet ships mentioned earlier. But that approach has an obvious problem. A drone that has to blow itself up to achieve its objective is one that Ukraine can never use again. That's not much of a problem when it comes to Ukraine's short-range aerial drones, which it can manufacture en masse and for low cost. However, USVs are more complicated to build, meaning they come at a higher cost. Even with this strategy, Ukraine was saving more expensive missiles for higher priority targets. Still, reducing the costs more by making USVs capable of attacking targets in and around Crimea before returning to base became a priority. Enter the new carrier USV. The Daily Mail says that this new technology combined the seafaring capabilities of a USV with a kamikaze first-person view, or FPV drones that Ukraine has used throughout the war to target Russia's troops and military installations. The result, essentially, is a mini aircraft carrier, a ship that can carry multiple aerial drones that can then attack everything from oil rigs to radar stations and anti-air batteries located in the Black Sea. Ukraine isn't just going after the Black Sea fleet ships anymore. With its carrier drones, it's knocking out the systems that keep those ships safe as it carves a path through to Crimea. There isn't yet much known about these drones. Ukraine's new carrier USVs don't even have a name. But what is known comes from a trio of sources that include the Daily Mail's video. On June 3rd, the Center for International Maritime Security, or CIMSEC, published an article in which it provided some basic details about Ukraine's new drones. It notes that one of the latest carriers Ukraine has developed is capable of carrying up to 4 quadcopter FPV drones, which it can launch against a Russian target at any time. This drone carrying capability opens up more options for Ukraine's drone operators. Imagine a USV that can sail within range of a target. Rather than launching a kamikaze attack against that target, it takes a layered attack approach. The FPV drones are unleashed, battering the target or distracting its defenses. The USV can then engage in a kamikaze run of its own to take out the target, or, depending on the operation, head back to base to pick up more FPV drones before traveling back to the target to continue the assault. CIMSEC also says that the new USV carriers have been upgraded to the point where they're capable of carrying up to 1 ton of explosives over distances of up to 621 miles. That's more than enough for Ukraine's new carriers to sail deep into the Black Sea, engage a target, and head back to base. If the USV is on a one-way mission, its range is high enough to reach many targets on the Crimean coast before delivering its insane explosive power. RBC Ukraine has also examined Ukraine's new carrier drones and revealed that there are several variants. One, which is likely the same type that CIMSEC examined, carries the 4 FPV drones already mentioned and is equipped with a traditional boat engine and propellers instead of a water jet drive seen in many of Ukraine's other USVs. That seems like a strange choice. Water jet drives offer greater speed and lower fuel consumption than traditional engines, as well as reducing noise by more than 50% when a vessel is traveling at over 20 knots per hour, according to Kongsberg. Perhaps Ukraine is trying to keep costs low by using this type of engine, or it may not see the need for more speed and maneuverability when it now has a carrier drone that can stay outside of the range of a target while launching FPV drones at that target. An unnamed member of Ukraine's Special Forces Reconnaissance Group also told RBC Ukraine more about this drone's capabilities. Our sea platform carries between 500 to 3,000 kilograms of various types of weapons, airborne, surface and underwater. The system uses cutting-edge technologies integrated with NATO standard artificial intelligence. So, add versatility to the impressive list of features Ukraine's first new carrier has. The second model RBC Ukraine mentions apparently has a much different hull shape than the first carrier, though it's still able to launch the 4 FPV drones the first carrier can launch. The news agency says that Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence, or GUR, has already used this version of the carrier to strike several Russian vessels and take out at least one Tor M2 anti-aircraft missile system in Crimea. Both versions of the carrier also have Starlink satellite communication antennas, which extend their operational range by ensuring operators can communicate with and control the drones over larger distances. It's all very impressive stuff, and Ukraine's new carrier drone becomes even more remarkable when digging into the other key features the Daily Mail says that it has. Starting with the bow of the USV, it appears that 3 impact fuses are present that ensure the USV detonates as soon as it makes contact with a target. The location of those fuses also suggests that the explosives Ukraine's new carriers can hold are also likely to be stored in the front of the USV. That's ideal for kamikaze attacks when Ukraine thinks they're warranted. Now, just behind that front bay is a forward-looking infrared, or FLIR camera. This FLIR camera can spin on its axis and tilt up and down, providing Ukraine's drone controllers with a first-person view, much like the aerial drones the carrier launches. The camera also has thermal imaging technology, which makes it possible for Ukraine to conduct clandestine operations at night just as easily as it can carry out missions during the day. Stealth, it seems, is a high priority for Ukraine's new carrier drones. There's also a hangar at the rear of the drone that the Daily Mail speculates could be used to carry sea mines or depth charges, along with other explosives. Yet more attacking power then. Ukraine's carrier can release these explosives behind itself, laying a trap for any Russian vessel that tries to give chase. Or, in the case of stationary targets, the USV can lay these charges at key points to cause maximum damage. That hangar is also topped with a mast that likely serves as a signal relay, which Ukraine can use to communicate with drone controllers. As for the drones themselves, they appear to be stored in a compartment located in the center of the USV. This compartment is covered to protect the drones while they're being transported and appears to be open remotely when the carrier reaches its target. Again, it's all very innovative, but how does the carrier fare in direct combat? There's an example of that too, also courtesy of the Daily Mail. It shares footage of one of Ukraine's carrier USVs in action, starting with a black and white shot of the carrier sailing with a Black Sea oil rig on the horizon. The trio of impact fuses, the Daily Mail mentions, is visible, with the footage also showing that Russia seems to be using the oil rig to mount GPS jammers and radar dishes, both vital forms of air defense in place to guard both Crimea and the Black Sea Fleet. The oil rig is already on fire, having previously been struck by one of Ukraine's kamikaze USVs. The carrier has a different purpose. It gets within range of the rig before sending its FPV drones into the skies. After briefly cutting to a view from one of the FPV drones, the footage cuts back to the video shot by a reconnaissance drone showing the quadcopters circling the rig. They were likely on the search for their targets. As for the USV, it's filmed backing into the rig several times over. It's reversing, the Daily Mail says, because that sort of action would trigger the 3 front fuses otherwise. It's likely that the carrier is laying depth charges with this action, which is a perfect example of the layered attacks mentioned earlier. While the drones circle while preparing to strike Russia's GPS jammers and radars, the USV drops explosives that can damage the support structures of the very rig on which those jammers and radars are installed. And then the third layer of attack. As the depth charges explode, the USV is steered directly into the rig itself in a final kamikaze act. This combination of aerial drones, depth charges, and the USV's own massive explosive potential appears to have been enough to decimate Russia's Black Sea radar station. This attack was conducted back in December 2024. Several more have been followed, says the Daily Mail. They include a January assault that saw Ukraine destroy a pair of Pantsir anti-air defense systems. A later attack, this time in March, took out even more Russian air defense units. March 19 also saw Ukraine reveal that it's been using its new carriers to attack more radar systems and even a Russian chopper. Not many more details are known other than Ukraine's claim that it has targeted or destroyed 24 targets as part of 6 separate raids. That means Ukraine's carrier USVs aren't a pie-in-the-sky idea. They're active, they're lethal, and they're destroying Putin's Black Sea defenses. And that leads to the reasons why Russia's president is so terrified of Ukraine's new innovation. First and foremost, Ukraine's USVs represent bad news for Putin's Crimean ambitions. Taking Crimea was one of the most important achievements of Putin's long reign as Russia's leader. He successfully annexed the peninsula, essentially giving Russia control over the Black Sea in 2014 when he started his first campaign of aggression against Ukraine. Since then, he's used Crimea as a logistical hub and attacking platform. Following the annexation, Putin ordered the construction of the Crimea Bridge, which stretches for 12 miles and cost around $3.7 billion to build. That bridge includes roads and a railway line connecting the Taman Peninsula in Krasnodar Krai to Crimea's Kerch Peninsula. Putin has been using that bridge to transport troops and military equipment into Crimea, both to build his defenses in the peninsula and in many cases to use Crimea as a waypoint for those soldiers and equipment before they're transported into Ukraine. Sky News says that Russia had been grappling for centuries to gain control over Crimea, though it had been part of Ukraine for 60 years before Putin illegally seized it. For Ukraine, retaking Crimea is key to the success of its campaign against Russia. Russia losing Crimea would have a drastic effect on Putin's ability to use the peninsula as a launching point for his attacks into Ukraine's south. This was evident during the early stages of Putin's invasion. Mariupol fell so quickly to Russia because Putin controls Crimea. Russia can also transport equipment via the Sea of Azov and into Ukraine's south. That equipment then heads into Donetsk and the rest of the Donbass, which helps Russia keep up the pressure as it battles for key regions like Pokrovsk. Sky News says that many in Ukraine understand that Crimea may be ceded to Russia as part of a future peace agreement. However, Ukraine doesn't want to do that. Accepting Russia's occupation as legitimate sets a dangerous precedent for Putin's other ambitions and makes it almost impossible for Ukraine to justify fighting for the territory. So, it's clear why one of the reasons why Ukraine's new carrier USVs are so important. They deliver more options to Ukraine when it comes to its fight for Crimea. If they're the game changer they look to be, they may also set the stage for Ukraine kicking Russia out of Crimea, which would sound the death knell for Putin's supposed special military operation. And that's big for Ukraine for a simple reason. It's been trying to weaken Putin's grip on Crimea for several years. Ukraine's problem, says the Daily Mail, is that these attacks aren't as powerful as they once were. It notes that the past saw Ukraine strike Crimea directly using long-range missiles, including UK-provided Storm Shadows and Ukraine's domestically produced Neptunes. However, those attacks have slowed down, partly because of the cost involved in using these missiles. Ukraine pivoted to attacking oil rigs directly with its missiles, though those raids also slowed down after one of them went badly wrong in February 2024, the Daily Mail says. But that doesn't mean that Ukraine hasn't been chipping away at Putin's Black Sea and Crimean defenses. It has, and it's been working. In October 2024, the Atlantic Council published a piece in which it claimed Ukraine has slowly but surely been weakening Putin's grip on Crimea. It notes that Ukraine has struck over a dozen targets on the Crimean Peninsula itself since the beginning of 2024, with the focus being primarily on radar stations, communications points, and Russia's air defenses. A handful of air bases were also targeted during this dozen or so attacks. The strikes were complemented by a renewed offensive against Putin's Black Sea fleet, forcing the withdrawal of many of the fleet's ships from Crimea and into Russia itself. The ships haven't become a non-factor, but Putin faces more problems when it comes to deploying them into the Black Sea. Most are now isolated in the Sea of Azov. Fast forward to more recent times, and Ukraine carried out a powerful attack against the previously mentioned Crimean bridge using an underwater drone on June 3rd. Check out our video covering this attack for more details, but the result was the temporary closure of the bridge and a message being sent to Putin that Ukraine is figuring out new ways to use its drones to hurt Russia. And that leads back to the carrier USVs. With these USVs, Ukraine now has far more options when it comes to hitting Black Sea targets. The oil rigs that Ukraine has held back from hitting are viable once more. The same goes for anti-air defenses on the Crimean shore, which have become vulnerable to FPV drones that can fly underneath their radar systems. If Ukraine's efforts in the Black Sea had pushed Putin to remove his ships from Crimea, its new USVs may have pushed those ships out of the waterway altogether. That would be devastating for Putin. Losing his ability to use the Black Sea Fleet against Ukraine means he'll struggle to maintain pressure on Ukraine's ground forces. It's also hard to ignore the cost aspect of Ukraine's new weapon. It's not yet clear how much Ukraine's carrier USVs cost. Ukraine isn't talking, likely because it doesn't want to give much more away about its new drones, but it can be safely assumed that the carriers cost far less than the missiles Ukraine has been using to attack Crimea and the Black Sea Fleet. For instance, the Neptune missiles Ukraine uses were the result of a $40 million development program, though a per unit price for those weapons isn't known. Storm Shadow missiles cost around $1 million each, according to the BBC, which is a heavy price to pay even when those missiles hit home on their targets. It's very possible that Ukraine is spending less than a quarter of that amount on its carrier USVs, while giving itself more attacking options than a standard missile could ever provide. The result? Potentially much higher returns for a significantly reduced outlay. The burning wreckages of radar arrays on a Crimean oil rig caused by Ukraine's carrier USV is proof of that. Furthermore, the new carrier USV is a domestically produced weapon. That's important for a simple reason. Nobody can cut Ukraine off from using it. That's been a concern for Ukraine since March, when US President Donald Trump temporarily suspended military aid and intelligence sharing to Ukraine. That situation has been righted, and the relationship between Trump and Zelensky appears to be much stronger today. Still, the scar of what Ukraine likely saw as a betrayal by one of its closest allies remains, meaning it will be very happy to have an effective weapon it can produce itself to hurt Russia's Black Sea Fleet and its stranglehold over Crimea. Putin, on the other hand, will be furious. The main reason why is that the carrier USV showcases just how well Ukraine has managed to evolve its drone strategy to account for everything that Russia throws at it. Forbes military correspondent David Axe made that point back in March when he first reported that Ukraine's drone carriers were raiding Crimean coastal defenses. He says that several nations are trying to develop warships that are capable of launching drones against an enemy. Ukraine got there first despite its navy having no large ships, and it did it through an evolution of drone tactics that saw it realize that USVs were the perfect vehicle to carry aerial drones toward a target. This evolution has enabled Ukraine to launch attacks deeper into Russia's rear, Axe says, which is an opinion backed by research analyst Samuel Bendit, who works with the Center for Naval Analyses. Speaking to the Daily Mail, Bendit charts the evolution of Ukraine's naval approach.
Ukraine started using them as one-way kamikaze craft against Russian maritime assets in port and at sea. And since then, since 2022, these USVs have evolved into multi-mission technologies that can conduct reconnaissance, they can conduct strike attacks, they can launch drones, and they can launch missiles and other types of weapons. And they've actually been quite effective.
That effectiveness is what ultimately creates the problem Putin now faces with his Black Sea Fleet. It would be one thing if Ukraine was using the same drones it used earlier on in the war. Russia could come up with counters to those drones to minimize their impact. However, the emergence of carrier USVs shows that Ukraine, even over 3 years into the war, is still coming up with ways to stay one step ahead of Putin. Ukraine's tactics change and become more layered, making it even harder for the Black Sea Fleet to respond. As Bendit tells the Daily Mail,
it is difficult to defend against these type of USV and FPV combined attacks unless, of course, those type of maritime threats are tracked and ultimately interdicted.
That's a much more difficult task than it might seem. The investment portal of the Republic of Crimea says that Crimea's coastline is over 1,550 miles long. The Black Sea is also massive, measuring in at around 169,000 square miles, according to the US Naval Institute. How is Russia supposed to track relatively tiny Ukrainian carrier USVs across such massive distances? The short answer is that it can't. That's a massive problem for Putin, as Bendit notes to the Daily Mail.
Ukraine can strike at different points and different locations in the Crimea itself against Russian military targets, as well as along the Black Sea coast. And of course, this is giving Russians very, very significant concern.
The reality is that Ukraine has just created a USV for which Putin has no counter. If it uses that USV correctly, the end of the Black Sea Fleet's dominance and the nullification of Crimea as a threat to Ukraine may be unfolding. And if all of that wasn't bad enough, Putin also has to contend with a brand new European Union plan that's set to remove Russia from the Black Sea forever. Find out more about that plan by checking out our video covering the details. And remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more up-to-date news and information covering the latest developments in the Ukraine war and other military conflicts around the world.